Are we ready?
Yeah.
Oh, don't knock on the door. Just come in, please.
Oh, well, she's trying to be polite now.
It's your house. On Sunday mornings, this is your house. Just go right in and do what it is you do as if you were home.
So we need to go away.
We can help ourselves to all the beer in the refrigerator.
If there was any beer in the refrigerator, you're welcome to any beer that's in the refrigerator.
You're so cute.
Come on in and have a seat, bro.
I'm working on it. You coming in or out? No? All right.
Well,
All right. Let's get started.
I've been a Charger fan since birth.
Well, we had season tickets for 38 years. We knew Dan House and John.
Is there a Charger game today?
No,
Preseason.
Oh, then have a seat.
no, the preseason's over.
Is there a Charger game today? Is it on television?
No.
Oh, then have a seat.
I was getting there. Gosh.
Uh,
Feel like I'm at my house.
He's the
No,
one
oh,
that
really?
interrupted me.
Yeah.
So we had a good time at the play.
Good.
I heard it was awesome.
It was good. We probably should have stood and clapped, but my
Thought about it.
knee was bothering me, and then I thought, well, I'm not standing. Maybe that's why everybody else isn't standing. And I couldn't tell, but I guess everybody behind us was standing. All in the whole in the theater was packed. Sold out shows all the weekend. This all sold out. So good stuff for Mayor and good stuff for the Collard clan. Scott, hardworking people, and I wish them nothing but the best. They're very dedicated people. You know, and that's the kind of stuff that makes a difference because they're investing in young people. That's more important than any Sunday school class you're going to take them to, because you're going to teach them about other issues that are real life. So this morning I thought we would talk about a parable.
You're not gonna
A parable.
share.
Okay, yeah, we're going to talk about Lazarus and the rich man. You can find that in the book of Luke, the 16th chapter. I picked it because it is pretty much the preeminent parable. Some people don't think it's a parable. Some people think it is that Jesus is being literal. But I don't believe he's being literal. If he was being literal, it would be news to the people that he was talking to. And so it's a parable, and a parable is an allegorical story. It's a parable is it's to illustrate or to teach a truth. It's the purpose of a parable. A religious principle or a moral lesson. The church has a problem. It's had this problem for a long time. It's had this problem since about the 4th century AD. It doesn't like Jews. Okay? It's a problem, but the church and its theology really doesn't like Jewish people. And so when they study the words of Jesus, they just naturally assume that any Jewish context is inconsequential. Any Jewish narrative, any Jewish aspects to the story aren't important. What's important is our theology, that we impose upon the words of Jesus. Because after all, we are Israel now. We are the church, triumphant and magnanimous and all that other good stuff. And so we don't realize that Jesus had literally no interest in the Protestant church when he was speaking to Jewish people in Israel. You were never on his mind. It wasn't about you. It wasn't about you. Okay? It's about Christ as Messiah trying to convince by miracle and by conversation and by action that there was a potential there for the whole nation to move into a different direction. And so the problem is that for the most part, in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, is not written to support, and Jesus' words are not written to support Protestant theology. Neither Arminian Protestant theology, nor Calvinist Protestant theology, nor Catholic theology for that matter. It is a conversation of a Jew to Jews about Judaism, about the promises of God in the Old Testament to the people, nation, Israel. And that's the conversations, that's the context. But the church takes over, Jewish thought becomes irrelevant. As a matter of fact, at a certain point, the church can't kill Jewish people quick enough. It can't kill them quick enough. It can't chase them around enough. It can't make terrible theologies about them so that they end up being perceived as evil people. Most of the pogroms and attacks on Jewish people throughout the history have a religious undertone. Because after all, everybody knows it was Jews that killed Jesus, right? And so you have in the 12th century, you have this great attack of Jews in France, and then later in the 16th century, you have even a worse in Spain, and then of course, under some of the ideas that Martin Luther professed, you have the terrible tragedy that happened in Nazi Germany. So let us look at this parable, this story, from a Jewish point of view. Would that be okay? If we don't impose our Protestant theology on it, but we ask a question, that question being, what did this mean to the audience that he was speaking to? What is the localized Jewish theological context? Jesus actually is not talking about hell at all. It's not. So I would say, fear not. Hopefully today we'll learn something. In Matthew 13, Jesus says this, or it is recorded that Jesus said this. All these things spoke Jesus unto the multitudes in parables, and without a parable spoke he not unto them, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet, saying, I will open my mouth in parables, I will utter things which have been kept secret from the foundation of the world. Let me switch this over. Let me read that. Let me say that there's 5 parables in this one sit down, 5 parables. Okay. There's the lost sheep. Remember, a shepherd leaves the 99 to find the one, the lost sheep. There's the lost coin. A woman loses a coin, and she sweeps the whole house to find the coin. There's the lost son, the parable of the prodigal son. There's the shrewd manager. We move into chapter 16. And remember, there are no chapters, so this is arbitrary. There is no chapter 15. There is no chapter 16. There's the shrewd manager. And then there is Lazarus and the rich man. Now, who's Jesus talking to? Who is the audience? Would you think that audience mattered? The audience is tax collectors, sinners, Gentiles, and Pharisees and teachers of the law. Of course, they muttered, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. So the context here is that they are not interested in anybody but themselves. Can you think of a theology today that's only interested in the saved, quote unquote? Only interested in the people that are going to heaven, and then there's everybody else? There are a lot of parallels between the way the Pharisees and Sadducees thought in the time of Christ and the way some people fundamentally think today are pretty close. And let's just read the parable. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. And at his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. If you have a King James, it says the crumbs. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. Now, if this is a literal story, let me explain something about how you tell a story. I was talking to my daughter about this morning. If you want a story to last, you make it over the top. It's interesting, my nephews and nieces still to this day remember that when we went camping, I would tell the story of the Yucca Man. Now, the Yucca Man was this terrible creature that came out at night and grabbed kids while they were in their sleeping bags and carried them off into the woods. But even today, as adults, with children themselves, they still remember the Yucca Man story. You see, when you look at the Old Testament and you see like the story of the flood, or you see these stories that are just bigger than life, why are they bigger than life? Because when you pass on a story orally, the bigger you make it, the more likely people are to remember it. See, you remember, because Jesus says, if thy eye offend thee, pluck it out. You remember that. The apostles had remembered it 70 years later. That was still stuck in their head, and they knew. Why? Because it was over the top. If your hand offends you, cut it off. You know, like you tell your children, if you do that again, I'm gonna, and you tell them something outrageous. Something you can actually be put in prison for. But the way we tell stories, and the better you tell a story, I remember at my boys, every night I would read them from Louis L'Amour, and we read most of the Louis L'Amour books. I would read them a chapter from Louis L'Amour from all the different books every night. And so they remember things because it was the villain was always particularly villainous. And the damsel in distress was just always so helpless. And the hero was he was average, but deep down, he was super. You see, we love this in America. We Marvel Comics, do you understand? That we love this. And so this was very common in the way people spoke in the time of Christ, in the Semitic areas, in the Aramaic areas. People would tell stories, and oh my goodness, the stories would make your toes curl. So Jesus is telling a story here, a story because he's trying to get across an idea. And the way to tell a story is, if you're going to tell a story, make it good. Right? That's why you know when your kids are lying, the longer it takes to explain. But you say, Mom, I'm not lying, I'm telling a parable. You see, I'm not lying, I'm telling a parable. And sometimes people actually tell parables, and their life is a parable, and they don't quite, trust me, most people don't quite remember their life the way it actually happened. The events are always blown out of proportion, and oh my goodness, they tell you their story, and you think, wow, someone should write a book about your life. Wow! This is how people talk. This is how Jesus talked. Now, if you take this kind of stuff and you do it the disservice by making it literal, and so there actually was a Hansel and Gretel, and she was going to put them in the oven and she was going to eat them, and there was a pile of bones there. And she had eaten other children before. This is the problem with theology applied to people who were storytellers, including Jesus, who was a great storyteller. Told wonderful parables all the time. Loved to tell parables. But make a parable literal, and my goodness, you are in trouble. Let us not make this parable literal, but it sure is over the top. Yeah, you can see it. It's so graphic. The guy's laying there, and dogs are licking him, and ew. And the other guy's so bad that he just throws crumbs off the table, and you're thinking, yeah, he deserves to get his. He really, whatever he gets, he deserves. And the time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side, or Abraham's bosom. But this is a lot of people there. You know, it's the only time that phrase is ever used in the Bible, just this one time in this one paragraph. But people want to make it into, oh, that's heaven, heaven's, you know, and all this. It's only used one time. But boy, you know, if they really like something, especially if it's ghastly and it means that most people that don't believe they believe end up going there, man, they'll just believe the most ridiculous things. And the rich man also died and was buried. And in Hades, Hades is just the Greek word for Sheol, which is just the place of the dead. It's just the place. It's the place of the dead, the place where you rest your head for a while until the resurrection. That's all. That's all it is. And then the Old Testament says, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. All right? Then in the resurrection, everything gets sorted out. It's all right. And in Hades, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. So he called him and said, Father Abraham, have pity on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water, cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this flame. Like, you know, and it's so crazy to think that that's literal and you're burning alive and you want someone to bring a little dab of water. You want to bring a bucket. All right. But once you've been committed to believing this is literal, it is so hard to turn your mind on this. We've been talking about how do you change your mind in the way you think. You actually have to reject what you did believe. But it isn't sufficient to reject it if you don't have something to replace it with. You understand? And so he called to him and have pity on me. Send Lazarus to dip his finger. But Abraham replied, son, or actually child is a better rendering. Remember that in your lifetime you received good things, while Lazarus received bad things. But now he's comforted and you're in agony. So this is how it works, you see. If you receive good things in this life, you go to hell. And if you receive bad things in this life, you go to heaven. Wait a minute. But if you're going to take it literal, you got to take the whole package, and it just doesn't make sense, does it? If you're rich, you should really be afraid. And let me tell you, most of us in America are fairly well off. So if this is literal, you should be very concerned, like Yoda said. You should be very afraid. He said, hold on. He answered, then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my family, for I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them, so that they will not come to this place of torment. And Abraham replied, they have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them. No, Father Abraham, he said, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent. And he said to them, if they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if one rises from the dead. Did you know that the word Lazarus is not the actual word here? Why do you think they chose Lazarus? It's a transliteration. It's a transliteration, the word Lazarus. You know what the word actually is? What the name actually is? Eleazar. Eleazar. Do you remember who was Abraham's servant in the Old Testament? Eleazar. Okay? So Jesus isn't saying the word Lazarus. When he's talking to these people, he's saying the name Eleazar. Well, why did the church decide to put Lazarus in there when the actual name in the Hebrew is Eleazar? Which, if they'd have put Eleazar in there, people would have started saying, wait a minute, isn't there someone else named that in the Old Testament? Could Jesus actually be talking about something Jewish? What a thought. Could he not be talking about an actual individual, but could these individuals represent something larger than themselves? Yes, indeed. And see, this rich man, he's dressed in purple and fine linen. Purple. You have to remember that the nation Israel split into 2 kingdoms. The northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. The southern kingdom of Judah was made up of 3 tribes: Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. The northern kingdom, you will remember, God issues them a writ of divorce. They are captured by the Assyrians, never to be any more, and they are scattered amongst the people of the earth, and they're done. At the time Jesus is in Israel, he's only talking to Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. Now, Judah is the tribe of kings. That's where David comes from. Levi is the tribe of what? Priests. Kings wore what color? Purple. Priests wore what kind of garments? Made out of what? Linen. Okay? So now we're beginning to get a picture here. Every word that Jesus is using has a meaning to them. We ignore those words and we want to take the story literal rather than try to figure out what is he, do all these words so? We have Eleazar, which is an actual person in the Old Testament before the law. And it is a reference to David. And so we have here Jesus speaking, who is what? Who is king and priest, but priest according to Melchizedek. We have Jesus speaking here. And he's explaining to them, you guys have a problem. Judah and Levi, you have a problem. You're rejecting your Messiah, and there's going to be consequences. There's going to be consequences, okay? And it says he was laid at the gate. That, see, when a Gentile wanted to become a Jew, he was called a proselyte at the gate. It's a common phrase that means a Gentile convert. So the picture you have here is Eleazar, who represents Gentiles. Because remember, Abraham says to God, if I die, all my stuff goes to Eleazar because I don't have a son. I don't have an heir. So according to the law, everything's going to go to this guy, and he's not even a part of my tribe. So Jesus is telling this story, and the Pharisees, the people who read, they understand what he's talking about, which is why they're so ticked off. Because they understand he isn't talking about some guy called Lazarus in some actual place called hell where people suffer forever and ever. He knows they're talking about them. And he's talking about their failure to rule righteously and properly, and their failure to care about anybody else other than themselves and their own little theology they had created. So it actually has nothing to do with a beggar. At the gate, that's what a person who wanted to convert to Judaism. And so the problem with converting to Judaism was there were so many rules, and you had to know so much. You know, Christianity, what do you have to know? Well, it just kept increasing. First, all you had to know was that, Jesus was love, and then you had to believe in the Trinity, and then you had to believe in this, and you had to believe in that, and then the list got longer and longer, and then you got to Calvin, and it was like 30 pages long. This is our creed, 30 pages long. And so what happened was, remember in another place, Jesus tells the Pharisees, he says, you go and you make a convert, you make him doubly destined for the grave. Remember, he calls them open grave sites. Jesus says to the Pharisees, you're open grave sites. You're open graves with the stinky smell of dead. Is he talking about actual graves? Is he talking about actually dead, stinking bodies? No. What is it, people? It's an analogy. It's a metaphor. You don't take it literal there. When he's talking about dead here, he's not talking about an actual dead person, but what that person represents is getting ready to die. You ever heard someone say, you're dead to me? Does that mean you're dead? No. See, we use this kind of language all the time, but when the Bible uses it, everybody wants to make it literal. Why? Because it serves your theology. But you know and I know. It's like you can tell someone, flame on, man. Do you mean you want to light them on fire? No, it does not. What it means, flame on, man. You got passion. Flame on. Or you could say, man, he flamed out. By which you mean, Dud. Dud. Started big and then flamed out. This is the language that we're talking about here. The worst thing you can do with this parable is to make the stuff that you shouldn't make literal, and miss all the other stuff that's telling you what the true story is really about. So he's at the gate. So who's at the gate? The Gentiles are at the gate. People, remember your history. Who was at the gate? Here you have Israel. They are conquered by who? Gentiles. You know the story, right? In 70 AD, do they not die? Do they not die as a people? Are they not destroyed? Aren't all the priests are slaughtered? You remember your history. All the priests are slaughtered. The system dies. That's what Jesus is talking about. He's talking about that what you have is going to become somebody else's. And so what happens? Paul says that. Then the gospel of the love of God goes where? To the Gentiles. So then the Jews can't catch a break. Because they made it so hard and they didn't do what they were supposed to do. Now when they need mercy, what are they going to get? No mercy. And did the Jews get any mercy? Oh my Lord. Have they gotten any mercy ever since this time? Do Jews get any mercy around the world? The only reason why they get a little attention now is because they got enough power to protect themselves. Okay? So Jesus is not here telling a story about heaven and hell, and rich people go to hell and poor people go to heaven. And when you're in heaven, you can see people that are suffering, but you're indifferent to it. I wouldn't be indifferent to it. See, what happens is, when you go to the 19th century, read some of the sermons that some of the hellfire and brimstone preachers preach, and they said, we'll be in hell and we'll be so happy because we'll be able to see people suffering and you'll just be glad it was not you. And so you'll turn around and you'll just thank God because thank God it's not me burning down there. Oh, I love you, God. That's a terrible picture. And yet, people have that picture in their minds today. In Anza, people have this idea that this is actually talking about something terrible. And so he's at the gate. And so the dogs lick his sores. People, it is common. Dog was a reference to Gentiles. If you study the words of Jesus, one time a woman came to him who was a Gentile, and he said, what do I have to do with the dogs? Dogs were Gentiles. That's how they were considered, dogs. So what he's saying is that only Gentiles are going to take care of Gentiles. You're not going to get what you need from the Jews. You're not going to get what you need from them. So what you need, you're eventually going to get from Gentiles. Right? Because the Jews had this idea, this law that Paul talks about, this wall of separation. According to the Gentiles, us special, chosen people, the born-againers. See, the Jews were the born-againers. They were the ones who had all the goodies, and everybody else were the dogs who, fend for yourself. And God says, well, yeah, but God so loved the world. It's, no, he loves us. Just us. And so, God, no, it's not going to work that way. And so Jesus is telling this story. It has nothing to do with heaven, nothing to do with hell. Genesis 15, just to go back to Eleazar, and Abraham's talking to God and says, Genesis 15, 2-3, and Abraham said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless and no one will inherit my estate? The one who inherits my estate is Eleazar from Damascus. Eleazar, which is the actual name there, which the church transliterated to mean Lazarus. Now, I think they picked Lazarus for a reason. Because we connect Lazarus with being raised from the what? The grave. And so I don't think it's accidental that the church picks that name. Why would you pick Lazarus when the actual name is Eleazar? I think maybe you're trying to deceive people. Oh, Pastor, could the church? Oh, no. Pastor, You mean when the church decided what words to pick in the Bible, it might have actually picked words in order for it to look better? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Otherwise, if they'd used Eleazar, and you go and you listen to all the people talk, listen to Chuck Smith talk about this, he'll never tell you that was named Eleazar. He'll just blow right past that. He wants to get to the juicy stuff. The stuff that was the crazy stuff that was Jesus was just telling to tell the story. And we're churches running around talking about the yucca man. Oh, the yucca man, watch out for the yucca. There is no yucca man. I just said it so that they would all get closer to the fire and then they would want to sit around and not go to bed. So we can have community. Right? It was just, I was trying to, and then that they would want to be protected and it's just something you're having fun. The church is all excited about the yucca man. Jesus, that could be Jesus saying, I wasn't talking about the yucca man. So the time came when the beggar died. The beggar is who? Gentiles. Jesus is telling a story. There's going to be the end of this thing. We're going to have a switch of fortunes here. Right? So Jesus says, unless the thing die, it abideth alone. So there's going to be a change in fortunes here and here. Death in the Jewish system, and then they're going to switch. Right? We'll read about this later in Romans. We'll see that God set aside one. Sometimes stuff happens in your life, and it happens. These are all figurative deaths. It's not literal death because you're not talking about a literal person. So it's a figurative death, right? You know, we say that all the time. Oh, I'm over that. I'm done with that. Oh, that's dead to me. I put that behind me. It doesn't live anymore. We use this kind of language all the time. That's what Jesus is doing. So the time came when the beggar, the Gentiles died, and the angels carried them to Abraham's side, and the rich man, Israel, Judah, Benjamin, and Levi were buried. Now, when were they buried? 70 AD. When what? When the Romans came down, the Gentiles came down, and what did they do? They destroyed Jerusalem. Does that make more sense than that there's this place, and you can see other people that are suffering, and they're asking for water, and you're saying, sorry, I can't help you? But Pastor, what about the Great Gulf? What about the Great Gulf that was between them? That is a picture of the River Jordan. Do you remember Moses couldn't go over? To what? To what? What was it called?
Promised land.
Promised land. It was called what? Paradise. Do you see? He couldn't go over. So what we have is the Jews are going to be expelled from what? They're not going to be able to enter where? Paradise. They're going to be what? On the other side of the river. In Israel, there is this great rift that goes through, and I've been to Israel, there's this great rift. And on the other side is the wilderness. Then there's the River Jordan, and then you cross over the River Jordan into the Promised Land. Jesus knows exactly what he's saying here, as do the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who can't believe what he's saying. Why? Because they believe the Messiah is going to come and conquer the Gentiles, destroy them, and the Jews are going to be the top dogs. And Jesus says, no, the first shall be last. Love your enemies. Do good to those who spitefully use you. And they said, no, we want to kill them all. Jesus says, you got it wrong. You're going to have a reversal of fortunes. You, like Moses, because you struck the rock twice. Who is the rock? Metaphorically, in the Old Testament, who is the rock? Christ. Right? So because you reject your Messiah, you're going to be put out, and you're not going to be able to come back. And what the Romans did, they took all the Jews and transported, the ones that they killed 1 million of them in 70 AD, killed 1 million. All the rest they transported up to Rome, where they built the Colosseum. Because the Jews were great craftsmen. They were all transported to Rome where they built the Colosseum, and then from there they dispersed out into the nations. And there was no Jews left where? In the Promised Land. Who was in the Promised Land? Gentiles. And the Jews were what? On the other side of the River Jordan. So there is a great gulf. Do you see the story now? Doesn't that make more sense? Then you're in heaven and there's people in hell and you see them suffering. And I mean, it makes more sense to me. Hey, Jesus says this in Luke 13. Look, your house is left to you desolate. I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. You're going to be on the other side. Not in hell, out of paradise. Paradise is not a place under the earth. Paradise is God's kingdom on earth is paradise. The church has told a story. They have fabricated a story that Jesus is all talking about heaven and hell. He's not. He's talking about heaven on earth. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. He's talking about the kingdom. This is a kingdom parable. This is not a parable for Protestant, weird, crazy, goofy ideas about hell, which they love. It's the only one they have. If you take this parable away from them, they're wandering in the darkness. It's their primary place to scare people and children into accepting Jesus as their personal Savior so they don't go there. It's interesting, the word flame. The word flame is not the same as the word fire. The word flame, Felix, is used 7 times in the New Testament. 6 times the word flame is attached to the word fire. Because the word flame doesn't necessarily mean fire. It means passion. So when you connect the word flame with the word fire, what do you have? You have passionate fire. Oh, I'm burning for you, right? You have this idea that you collect. So now when you connect the word flame with the word fire, you have what? But when you don't have the word fire there, and you just have the word flame, what don't you have? You don't have fire. What do you have? You have passionate suffering that will not be quenched. Because you gave out crumbs, you're not going to get back. Look, here's the story. Jesus says, you reap what you sow. Give a little, get a little. So he says, okay, I blessed you. You were supposed to be God gave you, you were supposed to show the love of God to the world. You gave out crumbs. You're not even going to get a drop back. When you're suffering, the world is not going to show you kindness or mercy. So that your suffering is going to be intense. And if you study what happened to the Jews in 70 AD, nobody came to their rescue, and they were treated terribly for millennia. Even right up until today. Right up until today, there are a majority of people in the world that would kill all the Jews if they could. There was a man who had a master plan to kill all the Jews. At least all the Jews in Europe. Do you see? What Jesus is explaining to these guys is, you don't get it. The other shoe is getting ready to drop, but it's not the shoe you think. You're thinking, I'm going to come and conquer all them, but I'm coming here to conquer your hearts, to realize your hard heart. You've become bitter. Your theology has made you separatists and superiors, and you think you're better than everybody else. And I kept telling you, God is no respecter of persons. You think you're saved and everybody else is lost. Sound familiar? And so Jesus is talking to them. So Jesus says, look, there's going to be a flame. But the word fire isn't there. Look it up yourselves in the Greek. I'm not making it up. You do your own study. So we have flame, which is flame on, dude, or he flamed out. But we have flame with no fire. Because the other 6 times, the fire is connected to it. You see, words don't have meaning. Words have usage. So people want to say, what does that word mean? No, how is it used? Right? Because if I say, Man, I'd give my right arm for that. Do I mean that I would give my right arm for that? No. If I say, you know, the other day I preached a sermon and man, I knocked it out of the park, does that mean I was at a baseball field? No. It depends on the context. So the context here is not about hell. It's about what? It's about the nation Israel and the Gentiles. God wanting to reconcile the world and the Jews wanting to conquer and they want to be Rome. They want to be the top dog. They want everybody under their feet. Jesus says, no, that's not the way it's going to happen. If you go my way, what's your way? Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are those. Blessed, blessed, blessed. No, we don't want to go that way. Peace will not work. Sword works. Well, let me tell you, how's the world doing today? How is the world doing today? And now we discuss, well, what we need to do is just bomb them on a little bit. More bombs will solve the problem. Some guy says, well, if bombs solve the problem, gas must really be good. And let me tell you, someone's thinking if gas is good, nukes are great. Why? Because it's us and it's them. It's us, the right people, and the beggars. The mentality of the earth needs to change. Our paradigm needs to change. And Jesus was telling them, your paradigm needs to change. And I'm telling you what it is. I'm telling you the paradigm of God is that will succeed is love. So what did the church do to this parable? They turned it upside down. And they made it into something terrible. Didn't they? Why? Because that's the best way to get people in the kingdom is to frighten them, right? Better watch out. God's into barbecue. So what we don't have here is we don't have, let me go to Romans, and I'll end in Romans. Because Paul, in hindsight, he looks back at this and he says, you know, God has a plan. Have you ever had something happen in your life, you weren't ready for it, and it came later? Like something came in your life, it was actually very good for you. Someone gave you an idea, but you weren't ready for it. I'll tell you why you weren't ready for it. You weren't willing to let go of the previous idea. You know, God comes to you and God wants to tell you that he's a God of love, but you're not ready for love. Why? Because you have other imaginations that need to be cast down. You have other ideas about God that are wrong. And so later in your life, things happen and maybe you have a little suffering comes into your life, maybe some trials. And then later, you become smart, and what was actually offered to you 5 years later, you now discover. And you go, oh my, or you say this, why didn't I see that before? What, how, you couldn't see it. Why? Because you did not have eyes to see, nor ears to hear. Why? Because of the condition of your heart. Because of where you were in your heart, it's easier for the church to believe that Jesus here is talking about some terrible place where people are burnt alive forever and ever. Because that's their God. And they're not ready to hear, to see what the Spirit of the Lord is really, what Jesus was really saying in this message. And so what the church has done is switch places with their theology, and they have the wrong theology about this verse. They have become the very people Jesus was talking to. And so what we have to do is, and so here's the truth. Not everybody's ready for this message that the parable of Lazarus and the rich man is not about heaven and hell. It's about heaven on earth, and will we stop this insanity of hating our enemies and wanting vengeance upon the other guy and being given love and not being willing to share it. See, Israel was given great blessings and all the truth and the oracles and the prophets. What did they do to the prophets? They killed them. Then they built them nice tombs. So Jesus shows up and he says, you guys are the height of hypocrites. You have wonderful theology and beautiful religious buildings, and you have forgotten. He has shown me, O man, what is good and what the Lord requires of